Jack Paar didn't just leave The Tonight Show in 1960, he detonated it. One night, a joke he told was cut by NBC censors without warning. It wasn't a minor edit. It wasn't a polite request, it was the silent hand of authority cutting the very words he chose to say. The words that made him Jack Paar, the man millions of Americans had invited into their living rooms. The next night, millions tuned in expecting laughter, banter, and the usual charm, but instead, they witnessed something entirely unexpected. Jack looked directly into the camera and said, "I am leaving because I cannot work with people who censor what I say." And then he did something no one expected. He stood up and walked out. Live, millions watched, stunned as the studio door swung shut behind him. The empty chair remained, a symbol of defiance, emptiness, and truth, sitting there for 3 weeks while America tried to process what had just happened. There were no retakes, no edits, no retractions. Just a man, his principles, and a void that echoed louder than any punchline. When he eventually returned, he wasn't apologetic. "I wasn't wrong," he said. And he wasn't. That moment was more than television. It was a lesson in integrity, in courage, in the power of walking away when your voice is being silenced. To understand the magnitude of Jack Paar's actions, we need to go back to the television landscape of 1960 America. Television was young, powerful, and expanding rapidly. It had become the window to the world for millions of households. But with that power came control. Networks wielded censorship not just as a means to protect audiences, but as a tool to manage influence, to manage taste, to manage the conversation. Paar, however, was not a man content to be managed. His humor was sharp, unpredictable, and often daring. He had a way of talking directly to the audience, connecting, teasing, questioning, and sometimes confronting. He was television that felt alive, human, and dangerous in the best possible way. And when a joke was cut, it wasn't just words being silenced, it was his very essence as a performer being questioned. The context of the censorship matters. NBC had rules, but Paar had trust. The audience trusted him to be real, to speak from instinct, to entertain without artificial restraint. They didn't tune in for perfection. They tuned in for honesty. And when the joke was removed, the invisible boundary between entertainer and institution was crossed. Paar realized that compliance would compromise everything he stood for. The decision he made wasn't impulsive, it was inevitable. If he continued, he would be performing, yes, but he would also be complicit. And Jack Paar wasn't a man who could accept complicity. He was a man who understood that integrity isn't about applause, ratings, or contracts, it's about truth. The night he walked out of the studio, millions of viewers were silent witnesses to something rare, the pure, unfiltered expression of principle. Today, in an age of sound bites and viral clips, it's easy to imagine what that moment would have looked like on social media. Tweets would have exploded. Comment sections would have filled with debates, memes, and hashtags. Back then, there was no digital amplification, no instant replay. There was only the live moment, unedited, unchangeable, and unforgettable. And yet, that moment resonated in ways even Paar could not have predicted. It became a symbol, a reminder that sometimes standing by your convictions is louder than any scripted laugh. Paar's return weeks later only reinforced his point. He did not grovel. He did not apologize. He did not try to smooth over the controversy. He simply stated, "I wasn't wrong." That simple sentence carried weight. It carried history. It carried a lesson in courage. Millions of Americans who had watched the walkout, who had debated it with neighbors, colleagues, and family, understood something essential. Honesty could get messy, and that was okay. Laughter could be delayed. Television could pause. But principles had a permanence that ratings never could. Paar had taught a generation that standing up for what you believe in could be revolutionary. But the story doesn't end with a walkout. It's in the lessons, the echoes, and the ripples that continue to influence us today. Jack Paar's defiance is a lens through which we can examine our own lives. How often do we stay silent because it's convenient, safe, or expected? How often do we edit our own words to avoid confrontation, criticism, or discomfort? Paar's moment on The Tonight Show reminds us that there is power in the decision to walk away, in the courage to hold your voice above the noise, in the willingness to sacrifice temporary comfort for permanent integrity. That is a lesson that transcends television. It transcends comedy. It transcends time. In analyzing why Paar's Walkout resonates so deeply, we must consider the psychology of defiance and respect. The audience didn't cheer. They didn't clap. There was no immediate celebration. What they witnessed was authenticity, a human being asserting his own values in a system designed to contain him. Psychologists call this moral courage, the ability to act rightly despite fear of consequences. And the consequences for Paar could have been severe. He could have been blacklisted, his reputation tarnished, his future compromised. But he acted anyway, and in doing so, he claimed something far more valuable than ratings: respect. Respect from himself, and respect from the millions who understood that integrity is non-negotiable. Even decades later, the story of Jack Paar walking off the show has been referenced, dissected, and celebrated as one of the most iconic acts of principle in television history. Comedians, journalists, and historians alike look back at that night and nod in recognition. He had done something no one else dared. He reminded the world that humor and honesty are not mutually exclusive, that the comedian's role is not just to entertain, but to illuminate, to challenge, and to reflect society's truths even when it makes institutions uncomfortable. We can also learn from the cultural context. In 1960, America was on the brink of massive social change. Television was both a mirror and a megaphone. The civil rights movement was gaining momentum. Youth culture was beginning to assert itself, and the public was questioning authority in ways unprecedented in the post-war era. In this environment, Paar's Walkout was more than a personal statement. It was emblematic of a growing impatience with censorship, conformity, and silence. His actions symbolized the larger desire for freedom of expression, the right to speak one's mind, and the courage to challenge the status quo. The impact of that walkout extends even to modern media. Today, when audiences see hosts, influencers, or public figures choosing principle over compromise, they echo Paar's defiance. They remember that while compromise can be comfortable, true respect, personal and professional, comes from alignment with one's values. Jack Paar taught us that sometimes walking away is louder than applause, and that a single act of integrity can reverberate for decades. And it's not just about the grand gestures. Paar's story is a reminder that our daily choices matter, even in ways we often overlook. Every time we speak our truth, stand by our convictions, or refuse to be silenced by authority, we channel that same courage that Jack Paar displayed on live television decades ago. Courage isn't always about dramatic exits or public demonstrations. Often, it's the small, consistent decisions that define a person's character. It's choosing to voice an unpopular opinion in a meeting, confronting injustice when no one else will, or refusing to compromise your values for temporary gain or approval. We may not be walking off national television, but in offices, schools, homes, and communities across the world, the principle is the same. Authenticity matters, and integrity is priceless. Every moment we choose to act in alignment with our values, we honor ourselves and inspire others. That is the unseen power of courage. Imagine for a moment the scene that night in 1960. Cameras rolling, millions watching, the tension in the studio palpable. The lights were bright, the audience expectant, and the pressure on Jack Paar immense. He had built a career on wit, charm, and spontaneity. Yet in that moment, Everything hinged on a single decision. The network had cut his joke without warning, undermining not only his performance, but his authority as a host, his ability to connect honestly with the audience, and his personal integrity. He could have laughed it off, apologized, or continued performing within the imposed boundaries. Millions would have applauded, ratings would have remained high, and his career might have continued uninterrupted. But Jack Paar did something different. He chose honesty. He chose principle. He chose to walk away. Jack Paar, composed yet resolute, announced to the audience, "I am leaving because I cannot work with people who censor what I say." And then he walked out. The silence that followed was deafening. There were no cameras rolling to catch a reaction shot, no internet to amplify the moment instantly, no trending hashtags or viral commentary to frame the narrative. It was raw. It was immediate. It was powerful. That silence, that empty chair, became louder than any applause could have been. It was a lesson in courage, in self-respect, and in the enduring value of speaking your mind, even when it costs you everything else. In that moment, Jack Paar demonstrated that sometimes the act of leaving, of refusing to compromise, sends a message more potent than any speech or performance. As we reflect on Jack Paar's legendary walkout, we are compelled to ask ourselves some difficult questions. Would we have the courage to walk away for our principles? Could we risk comfort, approval, or security for the sake of integrity? Would we rather be liked in the short term or respected for standing firm? In a world where compromise is often the default, where social, professional, or familial pressures nudge us to conform, Paar's story stands as a beacon. He reminds us that the cost of silence is far greater than the cost of standing firm. Principles matter more than applause. Authenticity matters more than temporary validation. Real influence comes not from compliance, but from courage. Jack Paar's story is not just history, it is a blueprint for personal empowerment. It challenges each of us to consider the moments in our lives when we might have compromised. How often do we edit our words to avoid confrontation? How often do we stay silent in the face of injustice or hide our true selves to fit expectations? Paar's act teaches us that while the walk may be difficult, the respect earned both from ourselves and from those who witness our courage is enduring. Integrity, honesty, and authenticity are timeless. They do not age, fade, or lose relevance. And Jack Paar, with a single walk off a studio stage, etched that truth into history forever. Consider the broader implications of that moment. Television in 1960 was a burgeoning medium with enormous cultural influence. Hosts like Jack Paar were more than entertainers. They were trusted voices, companions to families across America. When Paar walked away, he disrupted the cultural conversation. He disrupted expectations. He forced both the network and the audience to confront the tension between entertainment and control, between compliance and integrity. In doing so, he created a new standard for what it meant to be a performer, a public figure, or simply a human being. Truth over comfort, principle over convenience. This story also highlights the psychology of moral courage. Psychologists define moral courage as acting rightly in the face of consequences, even when it is risky. Jack Paar's decision was high stakes. He could have jeopardized his career, alienated his audience, and faced backlash from executives. Yet he acted anyway. The act of moral courage has a ripple effect. It inspires others to speak up, to challenge authority when necessary, and to uphold personal integrity even under pressure. When we watch Paar walk away, we are reminded that courage is contagious. Even decades later, his example encourages us to act when we might otherwise remain silent. It is important to recognize that Paar's walkout was not impulsive. It was the culmination of a career built on authenticity, wit, and risk-taking. From his earliest days in broadcasting to his tenure as The Tonight Show host, Paar cultivated a persona that valued honesty above all. He understood the delicate balance between entertaining audiences and maintaining personal integrity. When that balance was threatened by censorship, he made a choice that transcended ratings or contracts. In that act, he demonstrated a timeless truth: protecting your voice and your values is more important than any fleeting success. Jack Paar's moment of defiance also teaches us about leadership. True leadership is not about compliance or popularity. It is about making principled decisions, even in the face of opposition. Leaders, whether in business, government, or social movements, often encounter pressure to conform, to silence dissent, or to prioritize expediency over ethics. Paar's story is a case study in principled leadership, showing that courage is sometimes demonstrated not by commanding others, but by standing alone in defense of what is right, even beyond leadership. Paar's legacy informs how we think about influence. Influence is not measured solely by numbers of viewers, fans, or followers. Influence is measured by the enduring impact of your actions on others, by the ability to inspire, challenge, and provoke thought. Jack Paar's single walkout resonated far beyond the walls of a television studio. It reached homes, sparked conversations, and influenced generations of entertainers, journalists, and ordinary citizens. His influence reminds us that the most profound actions are often those rooted in principle, not popularity. Now, imagine bringing this lesson into your daily life. How many moments do we overlook where integrity could make a difference? A candid conversation with a co-worker, a moment of honesty with a friend, a decision to act ethically despite pressure. These are the small walks we take every day. Paar's story magnifies the power of such choices. He shows us that even one principled act, no matter how small it seems at the time, can ripple outward and create lasting change. Jack Paar's walkout also reflects the enduring tension between freedom of expression and institutional control. Whether in media, politics, or society at large, there are always forces that seek to limit what is said, to edit narratives, and to suppress dissent. Paar's act reminds us that standing up against such pressures is not merely an option. It is a responsibility for anyone who values truth. By refusing to be silenced, he modeled a form of courage that is as relevant today as it was in 1960. Finally, the emotional resonance of Paar's walkout cannot be overstated. Millions watched him leave, and the emptiness of that studio chair became symbolic of what we all feel when constrained, censored, or forced to compromise. That image lingers because it is human. We see ourselves in that empty chair, the moments we have wanted to speak, the times we have wanted to walk away, the occasions we have yearned to act with integrity but hesitated. Paar's courage bridges the gap between television history and human experience. It is universal, timeless, and profoundly inspiring. If this story inspired you, challenge yourself today. Identify one area in your life where you are compromising your principles. Speak your truth. Take a stand, or, if necessary, walk away. Share this video or article with friends and family to inspire them to do the same. Comment below. When was the last time you stood for your principles? Like, share, and subscribe for more stories of courage, defiance, and lessons that echo louder than applause. Remember, sometimes the most powerful action is not to perform for the world, but to stand firm. Speak honestly and walk with integrity, just like Jack Paar did.